Is everyone okay to go?
Yep.
Okay, good to go. Hi, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the March 15th, 2023 OWEB Water and Climate Committee meeting. My name is Jamie McLeod Skinner. I serve as co-chair with Bruce Buckmaster. I will be chairing today's meeting as Bruce has an item on the agenda. And then why don't we go ahead and just go around and have everyone introduce themselves. I'll just go around with folks on the screen. And so Eric Hartstein, why don't we start with you?
Great. Good morning, everyone. Eric Hartstein, OWEB Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator.
Bruce. And you're on mute, Bruce.
Thanks. Good morning. I'm Bruce Buckmaster. I'm a member at large on the board from Astoria, Oregon.
Thank you. Jesse.
Good morning, everybody. Jesse Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator at OWEB.
Thank you. Stephen.
Good morning, Steve Brandt, Fisheries Professor at Oregon State University, and I represent Oregon State University Extension on the board.
Thanks. Stephanie.
Good morning, Stephanie Page, Deputy Director, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
Gary.
Morning, everyone. My name is Gary Marshall. I'm a member at large on the OWEB board, and I'm from Harney County.
Thanks. Lisa.
Good morning, Lisa Sharplow Hansen, Executive Director at OWEB.
Thanks. And Eric Murray. So here at OWEB, our Erics are so good, we have to have multiple to cover all the bases. So Eric Murray.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. Good morning. Eric Murray representing NOAA Fisheries on the board.
Thanks. And Dan. Sorry. Yes, and we all same to be said with our Dans. So go ahead, Dan Shively, and then we'll go to Dan Brown next.
I was going to count on you going alphabetically. Good morning, Jamie and everyone. Dan Shively. I'm the USDA Forest Service non-voting representative to the OWEB board. Dan Brown.
And I am Dan Brown, and likewise, I represent the Environmental Protection Agency as a non-voting member on the OWEB board.
Thank you both. Corey.
Good morning, Corey Owens. I represent the Natural Resources Conservation Service as a non-voting member on the OWEB board.
Thanks. Lindsay.
Good morning, everybody. I'm having technical difficulties with my camera, so I'm going to have to keep it off. But for the record, my name is Lindsay McClary. I'm a public at-large voting member in the Salem area. Good morning.
Morning. And Kelly.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly Coates, and I am the tribal representative on the OWEB board.
Well, thank you, everyone. And just a reminder that this virtual meeting is being live streamed on OWEB's YouTube channel and also going to be available for those who want to engage and comment. Our process is to send something in ahead of time, and we always welcome public comment on these conversations and in this committee work. And let me see, why don't we go ahead? Jesse, can you just outline the agenda for today and then we'll kick it off?
Sure. So today, our first agenda item is to have a discussion around voluntary carbon markets. So Bruce Buckmaster is going to share a presentation with us, and then we'll have some time for committee discussion. Our next agenda item is a legislative update from Eric Hartstein. Our third agenda item is to discuss committee priorities and intersectionality between committees. So just thinking about cross-cutting topics between the DEI and the Grants Committee, along with this committee. And then our fourth topic is an update on the climate resolution rulemaking process and where we are within that. And then we have public comments. We have 2 written submitted public comments, I believe, and 1 verbal comment, signed up for verbal comment. And then just good of the order topics at the end.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any questions or any comments on the agenda from our committee members? Is everyone good to go? All right, excellent. Well, then let's go ahead and kick it off, and I'll turn it over to you, Bruce, for your presentation and comments.
Thanks, Jamie. since I have no idea how to share a screen, Jesse is going to do that, so we're going to try and coordinate. This is a brief overview on the voluntary carbon market. We've all heard about the voluntary carbon market. I think I first heard about it with the city of Astoria selling carbon credits for the Bear Creek watershed. We also saw it with the North Coast Land Conservancy acquisition at the Rainforest Reserve, and there were some issues there with OWEB's contribution to the acquisition fund. Taylor Larson and I also spent a day listening to a carbon credit plan at Shineko Wool outside of Maupin. So why might it be important? What is it? Why might it become more important to OWEB's climate resolution and our future funding decisions? So let's do slide 2. The concept and structure of the voluntary carbon market. At its core, the VCM trades in financial instruments. They're traded in a market that has no uniform standard for regulating their quality. And I guess the first evidence we can see if we look at this particular slide is that 4 of the major players, registries in the voluntary carbon market on the bottom right use 4 different terms to designate credits. Credits can be considered, you can call them a carbon credit or a carbon offset. So out of the gate, it tends to be a little confusing. Let's go to slide 3. And if anybody would like to spend more time looking at a slide, just let us know. This is a process and who does what. So we have a project owner, property owner or owners, somebody developing the program. That could either be the owner or a partnership. There is a validation and verification body, which we call VVBs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. There is the program itself, which determines the rules and the standards, whether a project will be accepted and by whom. Validation and verification, that tends to be, that is a monitoring and I guess self-explanatory. Then there are brokers, retailers, wholesalers, like any financial market, and the buyers, and these are normally organizations, corporations, or governments who have a desire to offset their current carbon emissions. If you have a cap and trade program where you are, there may be a absolute regulatory need to somehow get offsets. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that there's some similarities to OWEB projects, project owners, developers, validation, verification, those sort of technical aspects, the monitoring aspects. So there's similarities to a carbon offset program and much the way we operate in OWEB. But the confusion continues again. Verification and validation verification bodies, not all the programs have them. And some use in-house validation verification. Some programs have one, not the other. Some of these programs give lists of who would be approved to do validation verification. It's important to note that the developer pays for all the upfront costs, and if accepted, then they can recoup those at the sale of their carbon offsets. That confusion we saw on the last slide flows over into this one because there are variances in eligibility rules, what types of projects are accepted, the basic project standards, and the protocols and methodologies which may be used. Next slide, please. There are 170 easily identifiable types of carbon credit. But if you look at this particular slide, and I like this one because if you look at it, you can see that almost all of these areas that can be used in the voluntary carbon market are also areas where OWEB operates. Forest woodlands, there are a few that are not, but the vast majority fall right in line with what we're doing. Next slide, please. So then we talk about quality, and standards are what determine the quality. So carbon offsets have to have a few, all of them have to have certain standards, meet certain standards. First one's additionality, which asks the question, is a carbon that is offset or reduced from a project, is it because of the project, and would it have happened without that particular project or intervention? A project activity is additional if it results in emission reductions or removals that are in excess of what would have been achieved under a business as usual scenario. Conversely, reductions, removals would not have occurred in the absence of the incentive provided by the carbon market. Then we go to baselines. The baseline scenario represents the activities and the greenhouse gas emissions that would occur in the absence of the project activity. That is also open for a lot of interpretation, with particularly overestimation, underestimation. Getting a hard number on that is up to the registry, and there are variances. And then a standard is this offset permanent? The IPC, the International Protocol on Climate Change, defines a 100-year time frame for monitoring permanence, but many of the protocols do not have that long of a time frame. And the last standard is, or claimed, the fact that it can be claimed only once speaks for itself. And the last one is do no harm. Some of the add-on standards by some registries address climate community biodiversity standards. Not all of them do. And there's also a social carbon standard. Next slide, please. I like this this particular slide. There are concerns, criticisms about the voluntary carbon market, and they fall into general categories. If we look at the top list, the fact that there are no overarching standards, the additionality, there are questions on how was the baseline, how are baselines established, and there are concerns about failure to deliver. And this is from an accounting base, a monitoring and record-keeping base. This particular line of frequent criticisms is largely technical and solvable. We go to line 2. These are questions like license to pollute. Are these a license to pollute? Is there something wrong with paying someone else to reduce emissions so you don't have to reduce your own? I keep doing what I want to do and I'll just buy offsets. Greenwashing. where I'm going to market my products as eco-friendly, but because I can say that I'm net zero on carbon, even though my manufacturing hasn't changed. I've just bought offsets. Does it delay greenhouse gas reductions because it perpetuates business as usual? You can keep working on something, keep doing things the way you always have, just by offsets and slide by. This particular line, the second line, is they're primarily political issues, and frankly, I believe they can only be solved by regulation. We also have some less frequent but important criticisms that there are issues where carbon offsets have been sold, have been counted by, let's say, a US company buys a carbon offset in Africa, and then the country, the African country that they're buying them from also claims those credits as part of their national standard for or goal for reducing carbon. The question of, do we have enough buffer reserves? Do we really have permanence? And then the issue on societal, many issues lumped into societal environmental harm, impacts on indigenous peoples, the whole issue of, does this support business as usual or a true change? Next slide, please. Until high quality offsets become the norm and are used more responsibly to reduce impossibly unavoidable emissions, critics of the market will understandably continue to call attention to the voluntary carbon market's flaws and the danger on relying on inflated projections and masking inaction for progress. There remains a desire from both a financial perspective and an environmental one for the voluntary carbon market to increase its credibility so it can succeed. The 2 bullet points highlight the major benefits that are either realized or could be realized if we continue to improve the voluntary carbon market. It does stimulate participation among larger, more diverse groups of stakeholders than compliance markets. And it expands the reach of mitigation products through aggregation. We saw that, Taylor Larson, I saw that the Shaniko Wool Project was trying to include, was in the process of including a number of separate ranches, property owners, aggregating their particular project. With standards for quality, guardrails for integrity, and principles for use, the current market at $2 billion is projected to grow to as much as $50 billion by 2030. And that is a McKinsey report. And that's an incredible amount of funds for climate mitigation efforts. Next slide, please. There are a number of emerging developments. This is a rapidly evolving area. The U.S. federal government is interested in participation. They're addressing barriers to entry, offering technical assistance, improved standards, protocols, and market security. There are members, or market scrutiny. There are members on this committee whose agencies are working on this. We had a Consolidation Appropriations Act of 2023, which calls for the creation of third-party verifier programs, assistance providing. The Futures Trading Commission is looking at increased scrutiny on derivatives underlying cash market that overlaps with the voluntary carbon market. The Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market was established 1 year ago. And it is to act as an independent body, looking at public consultation, principles, high integrity labels. United Nations Framework for Conservation on our Convention on Climate Change, passed Article 6, specifically addressing double counting. And that is largely determined by industry versus national counting. We're starting to see more carbon offset rating providers, and that's going to emerge. New methodologies and technologies continue to improve measurement accuracies and monitoring. That's the end of my slides, although the presentation that you received does have all the site references. There are 4 pages of information. Decisions and considerations for OWEB, this committee and or the board eventually. We saw an issue with the North Coast Land Conservancy on our acquisition grant. There's a good chance we're going to be looking at either our funds or program funds, VCM funds, on matching funds. There are questions whether OWEB, it is advisable for OWEB to maintain an arm's length before, during, or after OWEB grants with projects that use a voluntary carbon market. There are appearance issues that we might want to address. Are we somehow sponsoring greenwashing as we get into some of the criticisms that come to the voluntary carbon market? Is it in our purview to limit project types or registries used based on their integrity or their reputation as far as it might reflect to us or to OWEB or to its partners? If we decide to have policies, will we be talking about rewarding participants at the expense of those already practicing good soil health and sequestration? So there are a lot of questions that are coming down the pike. On a personal basis, I don't know that there's any particular urgency, although staff would be able to tell us if any of the current projects we're talking about that are coming before us are interested in the voluntary carbon market and how it might impact their particular project. We know that Jan Lee and her group are looking at sequestration projects and are very interested in using the voluntary carbon market. So this presentation was an effort just to give you a quick background on the voluntary carbon market, where its strengths may be, where its weaknesses, vulnerabilities may be, and where it is in the development process. If you have any questions, we can ask Corey.
Steve, just before I call on you, thank you, Bruce, for a really phenomenal presentation, the information provided. Voluntary carbon markets are such a critical part of the conversation on whether you want to call it climate change, climate crisis, whatever we're calling it, it is here. And so how are we addressing and responding to it? And then also, how is it impacting the decisions that OWEB is making about the investments we make in public money to help address, to help our ecosystems, our watersheds, our local economies, but also help to prevent or minimize the path that we're on right now. So I wanted to, after Steve, I wanted to really encourage all our board members to, if you have questions or if you have comments and thoughts in response. And then Bruce, you mentioned several perspectives we may think about this from. If we haven't captured those towards the end of this conversation, then please prompt again to see if there's, because I think those are all really important questions that you asked. And then also, of course, want to encourage staff to weigh in and share thoughts as well. So let's get to the board member questions first, get to the staff questions. And then lastly, just a point of, I know staff is so slammed and does so much work, and having board members like Bruce step up and help out with some of the information sharing, just really appreciate that effort. So let's go Steve, then Corey, and then Gary on questions. Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks, and thanks, Bruce, for that background. This is probably a very naive set of questions, but I'm wondering if you could walk through a simple example. And let's say I have 1,000 acres of forest that I want to sell carbon credits for someone as an offset. Is that something an individual can do? Can they, when they sell the carbon credits, is it a one-time payment? And then is it a one-time payment for basically not doing anything for your forest for how many years? Or is it an annual payment? Or, and what is it if I had 1,000 acres of forest and haven't done anything with it for 20 years and now I want to get credit for not doing anything? Is that a possibility? I mean, how does it actually work on an individual kind of case-by-case basis?
That's a great question, and it has the same answer that almost all of your questions do. It depends. Is it a candidate? Yes, I can answer that. If you've got your 1,000 acres, then you have to, so let's say you're interested in selling a the carbon credits. You have to establish, to the satisfaction of the registry, the organization that would accept, would work with you to buy those credits, that it is additional. If there was, let's say you had it all in, it was tied up in a manner that you would not cut that timber anyway. It would be hard to justify saying, well, this is a additional carbon retention because you didn't intend to cut it anyway. So that gets to that baseline issue that we've talked about, and the additionality that is largely interpreted, and it has to, you have to convince the whomever you're talking to that if you didn't sell these credits, then that particular timber would be cut. So that's the first hurdle that you have to do. Then you look at permanence and all the other standards we talked about. But an individual can, to answer your question, an individual can enter into the market, and they have done so. And if they meet all the requirements through the registry they're working with, then generally the payment is an annual payment over a given length of time, and that can vary based on the registry.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
So I just wanted to chime in a little bit with where USDA NRCS is right now with carbon markets. And of course, Dan will have a different perspective from Forest Service. But as of today, we as an agency are not really involved at all in the monetization or the market side of the carbon. We are fully aware our clients may be implementing NRCS, funded practices that put them in a position where they might be eligible for taking that into account for eligibility or program delivery or practice implementation. We do recognize that the ability to enter into a market as a funding income stream for our clients might be incentive for them to look to us to do practices that they may not have considered before. But as of right now, again, that's not a component of how we're determining who, where, what work we do. I suspect that this will be something that gets answered at the agency level, at the USDA level. USDA's involvement in markets is, if we need a parallel, you can think of organic. So for years and years, organic certification was similar to this, where it was lots of different entities and bodies were doing their own thing. And then, gosh, it was what, 15 years ago or so that they actually requested, interest groups and those bodies requested that the USDA standardize organic certification to become a standard that everyone could choose to use. Something like that might happen if I was going to have to draw a parallel to these types of things that have happened in the past. That's just Corey's crystal ball, right? But I just want to make sure everybody knew right now that as far as NRCS is concerned, if our folks get cost share funding to implement climate smart practices that end up with them mitigating greenhouse gases, it is completely up to them if they choose to explore carbon markets. And a great presentation, Bruce. Really appreciated the time and thoughtfulness on that.
Thanks for that clarification, Corey. Gary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gary Marshall for the record. Great information, Bruce. That I learned a lot there. And trying to think about it in terms of the effects of OWEB and the practices that we have had and that we're potentially going to have in the future. But still, on the other hand, I couldn't help but thinking about the question of scale and how and who might participate in this. How small it would people or owners of parcels be eligible for for this program. And I mean, is this you've been going through this quite a bit. Does this exclude urban people and settings, or is this does this have to have are we just looking at the bigger ripe fruit right now to pick, or is there a long-term concept of this that a lot of people might participate in? If so, how are they going to monitor that, and what's the reporting and all? I mean, just so many questions here. So
yeah, Gary, I agree with you. I think that there are an incredible number of questions. Quickly, the urban environments, urban projects are not precluded. They certainly could be involved. There is a lot of interest in aggregation. So smaller groups, smaller landowners getting together, smaller entities getting together, combining under one project in the voluntary carbon market. I think that is one of the things that is very appealing to Jan Lee's group as they start looking at sequestration projects, not looking at a single property owner, but a number of property owners. So a lot of this is to be determined. It tends to be wide open as far as what can be proposed as a offset project. We'll just have to wait. I think we're going to see as it evolves, we'll see more and more entities participating, and what type of those. Certainly the big ones, large landowners, large timber owners, they have, it's a lot of money, and they have an opportunity to create an income stream. So the emphasis is doing it for them. The incentive is very real, very large. However, these smaller aggregations are looking for funding to do certain kinds of work. Therefore, if the voluntary carbon market is a source of funding that will enable them to do certain things, I think we'll see more activity along those lines.
Okay, one more question, Bruce. So if it's producing an income stream, and so what are how is this going to be taxed? What are the tax implications of this?
I have absolutely no idea. Yeah. I know, the first place that this had a nexus with OWEB was with the North Coast Land Conservancy on the acquisition. And I would expect that is where we will see the quickest or the most obvious place where OWEB will have to deal with our funding in the presence of a carbon offset project. Basically, and please staff, tell me if I've got this right. What happened is the North Coast Land Conservancy was paying, I believe it was $8 million for a piece of property at the North Coast, at the Rainforest Preserve around Cannon Beach. OWEB awarded a grant, acquisition grant of $2 million. It is within our grant document that we gained ownership, or we created an easement for what is those carbon offsets. Therefore, when the North Coast Land Conservancy went for an when they began to consider selling carbon credits, OWEB had to say, wait a minute, you can't sell something, we already have that encumbered. It was settled. I think Eric Williams and staff threaded that needle as well as could be, and they were able to sell. I think again, I could be wrong here, but I think if we had 20 or 25% of the purchase price, they were able to sell 75 or 80% of the carbon credits. So our funding came off the board. And that went through the Department of Justice. I mean, we had serious legal reviews on what we could and couldn't do. If we were to change that in our acquisition program, it would, I believe it would require some either statutory or policy work that we have not done at this point. Lisa, look like you're ready to say something.
Yeah, you got that pretty close to right. I mean, I think that we proportioned it based on the funding, and the portion that OWEB funded was deemed not to be available for carbon credits. And I think there is as much an issue around double dipping on public funds was the piece of it, and trying to work through that and trying to set a consistent policy around it. And so I just wanted to clarify, you captured it at a very high level in a great way, Bruce, and some of the issues that we struggled through, working through that as in a new process that's emerging.
And I just comment that this is important it was important for the North Coast Land Conservancy and will be important for others, that the carbon market provides an ongoing income stream post acquisition that pays for management. And it was very important and I was proud of how OWEB worked with the North Coast Land Conservancy to say, well, let's see if you can keep that income stream with the portion that we did not fund and all that. But that's a big chunk of money out there for acquisition, for maintenance, management, long-term. People will be looking, projects will be looking to the voluntary carbon market for that income.
So thank you for those comments. And Lisa, to your comment about the thinking around policy and approach the staff is doing, why don't we get out some additional questions and initial thought pieces now, and then get this on our agenda for our next committee meeting as well, because that will allow a follow-up conversation and some of a deeper dive as we think about it. I mean, there is so much to this, and I'm sure board members would like to kind of hear where staff's at and weigh in on some thoughts. Obviously, this is not the decision-making body, the full board is, but it allows us to continue that conversation, because to Bruce's point, there's so many potential impacts on OWEB, on our partners, and how we can be, again, wisely investing and targeting our limited resources to have the maximum potential positive impact. I'll go to Dan next, and then I'll ask people for comments and questions that we can be thinking about now, but also thinking about in preparation for our next meeting. And then Bruce, if you would you be willing to work with staff and kind of capturing some of these questions and helping to think the thought process we can set up for our next meeting as well? Does that sound like a good process? Both Bruce and Lisa and Jesse, can I just get a thumbs up if that approach seems to work? Okay. So let's get out more focus on questions right now. The one other thing I want to flag is that because one of the folks who wants to comment, be part of the public comment process, has a hard stop at 10. We're going to do that item next. And so let's take about 5 more minutes to raise questions and really kick this conversation off. And with that, I'll turn to Dan Brown.
Thanks, Jamie. Well, I wasn't coming in with the question, but I think I can turn this into a question. So thanks for all the information, and most importantly for that last discussion, because that sort of brought it home in my mind, like what is sort of a potential issue for OWEB, and you gave a great example of that. And I guess the question is that I can turn my comment into a question around that is, Bruce, and that sounds like it's an additionality issue, right? I mean, so the question, I guess, is wouldn't either some high, I mean, it sounds like an additionality policy, regulation, statement, whatever you want to call it, would solve a problem like that for OWEB? So that would be my question. Would a policy around additionality eliminate that kind of a problem in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was also, when the presentation on additionality, I was also thinking about potential changes in land use over time. So if you not just change what you're doing now, but if you don't do something you may have otherwise done with your land going forward, I'm not able to, I think, present that well, but that additionality piece, I think doing a deeper dive into that. And Bruce, you did a great job of listing out some of the key pluses and the concerns. And so I think that really sets a framework for a conversation going forward and figure out what that internal policy would be for OWEB. And my assumption is we'd have a deeper conversation in this committee before bringing it before the full board for a discussion and conversation. Other questions from board members or staff, and I want to also invite staff to comment. What are some of the other things we should be thinking about, again, in preparation for a later, deeper conversation on this as well, because I do want to be able to get to the other agenda items.
I think there are some questions, Jamie, around how we approach it as a state as a whole and consistency across the state enterprise. And that was something that we spent a lot of time thinking about and working through as well. So you don't want to have differences between the agencies. So just, I throw that out as something we should consider. I do have a question, and this may be a really, really naive question, but how does this overlay with some of the work we're doing around shared stewardship, forest management, changes in forest management going forward?
Yeah, I think, and if it's okay with the group, let's go ahead and set that as one of the sub items on this for our next agenda, because absolutely, and Lisa, and that's what you're charged with, right? Making sure that we're aligned, that Oregon is speaking with one voice, working in close partnership with our other state agencies. But also, one of the things OWEB is known for is being a leader in showing how to do some of this work. Because this is something that all state agencies are kind of grappling with and trying to figure out. I mean, there's a lot of goodwill within the state, and yet how do we do this work? And that's something that we have an abundance of riches and good fortune in terms of the great team that we have that has got some of that really creative ideas. And so we can also lead that discussion. So I would encourage us to look at it from both perspectives. But that is, I mean, that's a huge piece in and of itself is the question you raised, Lisa, but a really critical part of this conversation. Other questions from staff or board members that we can be incorporated into our conversation next time? Okay, so seeing no hands up, this is really a start of a really important conversation. And also for those who are watching, want to really invite those members of the public who are interested, weighing in, send us an email, share, and we'll get when public comment period. We'll have staff talk about how to do that, how to share information, and also encourage you to help us share your ideas on what we need to be doing to have a fuller conversation on this. And we'll make this the bulk of our agenda for our next meeting, but a really great start to a very important conversation. Thanks so much, Bruce, for your work, and thanks staff for helping to prep it up as well. And with that, let's go on to our next agenda item. And as I mentioned, we're going to bump up public comment in respect for the scheduling for a member of the public who wants to be able to weigh in. We will, let me see, on public comment, because this is such an important part of our conversations. I know we received some comments in writing by email. What I'm going to do is after the public comment, person who wants to comment in person, and I believe that's Alex. After Alex's comment, what we'll do is I'll ask staff to give a summary of the emails that we've received and some initial comments and response on those emails, as we do in our board meetings as well. And then also for those members of the public who do want to weigh in, you're welcome to listen in on our meetings. You're welcome to comment at our meetings. What we ask is that you send us an email ahead of time to essentially reserve your spot. And then or you can also just send emails, and those will be acknowledged during our meetings as well. And with that, let me turn it over to you, Alex, and we'll give you a couple minutes to share your thoughts, whether it's on the topic we're discussing or another.
Cool, awesome. Thank you guys very much for having me. I'm a member of the public. My name is Alex Wick. I'm a master forester, serial entrepreneur, and the founder of Cascadia Carbon. My company includes small landowners into the voluntary carbon market. Historically, it's really been only large landowners, as you guys were mentioning, that have sort of the capital necessary to actually list their offsets according to a standardized methodology. And so we're working to build software which allows anyone anywhere, no matter how many trees you have, even if you only have one tree in your front yard, it will allow you to list that tree and the offsets it produces on the VCN. And I know you guys are probably struggling with, a couple of different issues. The first one being additionality. And I think that really, whenever anyone asks me about additionality, I mean, the important thing is like, what is it removing carbon? So is it actually carbon negative? So if it's a Dodge Ram 1500, it's not carbon negative. If it's a tree, it likely is. But then also, beyond just like, is it carbon negative? There is the question of, is it business as usual? Because if you're warehouser, for example, and you have hundreds of thousands of acres of land, it's a lot easier for you to say, okay, we're going to, implement this methodology on this land and then sell these offsets. But that really gets tricky because if they're already growing these trees for harvest, it really isn't additional. So I guess I would urge OWEB and any state agency that's sort of considering regulation or any sort of rules to really consider where the person is coming from. If you have a single tree in your front yard, really additionality isn't that much of an issue. Whereas if you have hundreds of thousands of acres of functioning, working timberland, additionality, you want to see them doing something more. You want to see, extending harvest traditions by 10 years, by 15 years, doing something meaningful to actually create that carbon offset. Another thing I also want to comment on is the idea of, the idea of double counting. And there definitely are ways you can stack state grants. So whether it's, DEQ and OWEB and things like that. I think that's probably less of a problem than the actual double counting. So, if whoever it is, whether it's an individual with a tree in their front yard or warehouse, or, if they're selling credits multiple times, that you run into issues with. And so I think that by using or mandating a strong methodology, which protects against that. So there are, I don't want to say hundreds of methodologies, but there's a variety of methodologies from BERA and ACR and gold standards, or these centralized registries to more decentralized regenerative finance registries. And I think as long as the offset is listed with one of those that accurately and adequately prevents double counting, I really don't see the sort of the issue with stacking multiple state or federal grants. And so I guess that's all I have. If you guys have any clarifying questions, feel free to ask me, but that's basically all I have.
Alex, no, great. That's excellent input and feedback. And thank you so much for joining the conversation and sharing that. It also just shows the abundance of wealth of insights we have around the state. And this is why the public comment period is so important as part of our meeting, part of our discussions. So really, really appreciate that. Wanted to and also encourage you to again submit if you have additional thoughts or comments. We will have this on our next committee agenda meeting discussion, and if there's other thoughts you have, please do join that as well. And I also just want to really say I really appreciate the focus on engaging small landowners. That's such a, when we add up all the small landowners, small family farms, that's really the muscle of Oregon. And so really, really appreciate that comment as well. Wanted to turn it over to, and I'll ask Lisa or Stephanie or Jesse, whoever wants to take the lead on this. I know we received other public comments. Can we get staff to just share the number and essentially the comment or the question raised? And I know we just got an email, we received one today as well, and just a brief response to that, because we just want to be able to acknowledge those as well as part of our public comment period.
Oh, Jesse, you're on mute.
Thank you. I got the message just as I started talking. Jesse Kirshner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator. So just very briefly, we had 2 submitted written comments from the public. One of the comments was actually providing a series of different resources for the committee to consider. So there's different links to magazine articles, position papers, and other information, just trying to provide different perspectives on the voluntary carbon market and where there might be, what carbon offsets actually look like, what that means in terms of trade-offs when it comes to implementing different conservation programs, for example. So it's just one of the public comments, like I said, is just a series of resources for the committee to consider as we, continue this conversation, and for staff to consider. The other public comment that we received is just in talking a little bit about forest cover and how, let's see, forests do sequester and store carbon dioxide. The issue is more around heating of the earth is what the public comment focused on, and how things like population growth and transition of land uses to more of, I'll say, like impervious surfaces, those kinds of things contribute to that warming. So thinking about it was just more of a thought-provoking comment about how we still maintain our forests, but also increase forest cover, given that we have these competing demands for uses of our land. And thinking that, and they encouraged that tree farmers getting more involved in the discussions that we're having. So.
Great, thank you so much. And for those who are interested in commenting in the future, written comments, and also if you do want to make verbal comments as well, please send an email to, the email address is april.mack@oweb.oregon.gov, and that's April like the month, .mack@oweb.oregon.gov, and go ahead and make those, submit those comments, and we really appreciate input from the public. Let's move on now to the legislative update, and Eric Hartstein, if you'd like to provide us with that, we appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Jamie. For the record, Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator. So I'll give a fairly brief update on the policy bills that we're tracking, and Stephanie will also provide an update on OWEB's budget. So To kick things off, we are about 2 months into the legislative session right now, and it's really a pretty busy week as the legislature is approaching an important first deadline, where if bills aren't moved out of most of the policy committees, they will not be moving forward. So it's a busy time at the legislature right now. We're tracking a number of policy bills with some nexus to water or climate, and so I'll give you a brief summary of those here today, as well as their current status. Just a note that OWEB does not have any policy bills for consideration in this legislative session, and we have no position on any of the bills we're about to talk about. So the first one with a connection with water is House Bill 2813, which would direct OWEB to establish a grant program to provide grants to protect source drinking water. This grant program would be for the acquisition of lands or the purchase of conservation easements or similar agreements in order to protect source drinking water. The bill has an appropriation of $5 million to OWEB for grants as well as program administration. And that bill has moved out of the policy committee and is now in the Ways and Means Committee, where legislative budget decisions are made. Next bill is Senate Bill 530, which would establish state policy regarding natural climate solutions, would also establish a natural and working lands fund, and develop baseline metrics and goals for carbon sequestration and storage on natural and working lands. This is a bill that we understand is being amended now, and we expect that OWEB will continue to play a role in an amended bill. It's currently in the Senate Natural Resources Committee. House Bill 2998 would direct OWEB to provide grants to support soil health practices through the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. This bill has an appropriation of $980,000 for grants, and we've provided information on what we would need to administer this program as well. So the bill actually moved out of the policy committee yesterday and is referred to the Ways and Means Committee. And also related to OAHP, House Bill 3366 would provide $10 million for grants and support administration of the Ag Heritage Program. And this bill is scheduled for a public hearing tomorrow in the House Agriculture, Land Use, Natural Resources, and Water Committee. And pretty much hot off the press, there's a bipartisan drought relief and water security package that was publicly released yesterday, which references OWEB in several locations related to drought relief and resiliency, as well as things like irrigation modernization. So OWEB staff is reviewing the package, and we're continuing to have discussions with other agencies, interested parties, legislators about the package, and we'll provide updates to this committee and the full board as we learn more. So I'll turn it over to Stephanie, see if there's anything else you want to add on the policy bills, as well as an update on OWEB's budget.
Nothing on the policy bills. Great job, Eric. I'll just transition to giving a quick budget update for everybody. So I'll just review some of the key items that are included in OWEB's governor's recommended budget, and just talk a little bit about timing and next steps. If I recall, during the January board meeting, the budget hadn't come out yet. It came out just about a week after the January OWEB board meeting. So I'll highlight a few of OWEB's program option packages or policy option packages that were included in the governor's budget. And also just want to note that the governor's budget did not include any cuts to current service level for OWEB. It preserved OWEB's core programs. That So that is, I think, something important to mention. So in terms of the policy option packages that were included, one that is in there is one of the organization structure packages that OWEB had requested. So this package reclassifies 2 manager positions and reclassifies a staff position to a management position. And this package gets OWEB part of the way to the organization structure that the agency needs in order to be able to fulfill current and future responsibilities. So I'll just note that in discussions about some of the pending legislation that does have a funding impact to OWEB or a resource impact to OWEB, we've noted that we're not able to take on additional programs and responsibilities without fully being able to build out that organization structure. A couple of federal fund packages are included in our governor's recommended budget. One for a Tidegate coordinator position. It extends a limited duration position in our current biennium budget. And then a new position focusing on National Historic Preservation Act compliance. So those are both federally funded. We're also pursuing an opportunity for federal funding for climate work at OWEB to be able to continue that work. So that is not in the governor's budget, but that is an opportunity that we're pursuing. Switching gears to a couple other programs and packages that provided some continuity of those programs. OWEB's policy option packages for the Oregon Ag Heritage Program include continuation of existing staff and then continued spending authority for the existing investment that was already made into the program in February of 2022. The budget does not include new investments into the Ag Heritage Program. So it's really about continuity of what was already made. And then with regard to the post-wildfire recovery grants, drought package, and so forth, there were limited investments in drought programs included in the governor's recommended budget, livestock off-stream watering and irrigation modernization. There were other components that OWEB had requested carry forward for because in part, we have funded a variety of grants with these general fund dollars that are planned to continue into the 2023 to 2025 biennium. So we've had some conversations after the governor's recommended budget came out about how to assure continuity of those projects with the funds that we have already committed. And we've been advised that this issue will be taken up during our budget hearing and during the Ways and Means process in the legislature. So transitioning to the timing of that Ways and Means process, our budget presentation is scheduled for the week of April 10th. So that's the current timeline when we anticipate we'll be presenting to the Ways and Means Subcommittee on Natural Resources. And that's kind of what we know right now in terms of the timing. So I'll be happy to take any questions and see if Eric or Lisa has anything that they'd like to add.
I would just add a little bit around the drought and fire continuity package. So if you remember, the legislature during the current biennium provided allocations of general fund for drought and fire relief. General fund is either spent in the current biennium or it reverts. And unfortunately, OWEB's grant programs and the work that's done by our partners InStream don't recognize necessarily that June 30th cutoff. So there was, I think, maybe less understanding around how OWEB does its grant making and the rules that we use in our grant making process, assuming that applications came in, grants were awarded, and money went out. That's not how OWEB grant programs work. Applications come in, awards are made, grant agreements are entered into, work is done, and then funding is provided generally on a reimbursement basis, which has this crossover piece. So the conversations have been after the governor's budget came out, there's been a lot of discussion about our process and the rules that we have for our process, why there needs to be continuity across the biennium for that spending for the commitments that are already made. And we've had strong assurances that it will be dealt with during the budget presentation and in our budget bill.
So Lisa, to that point, just to summarize, if our project partners have already started work, there's a confidence there that that work will be reimbursed. That's what I think I'm hearing. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think a couple things have happened, Co-Chair. One, any work that they can get done before the end of the biennium and can be reimbursed is really get it done. There's confidence there. It's those pieces that have been contracted out, and it's made it hard, I think, for some of our partners who were in the process of contracting to have surety without it being built into the governor's budget. And so that's where there has been, I think, some concern. But again, in the conversations with the governor's office and legislative leadership, we've been assured that there is an intent to address it, that those commitments were made by the state and the money was intended to go out on the ground.
Thanks. And it's completely understood that the governor's budget becomes our budget.
Yeah.
So that part is not part of this question. But legislatively, would it make sense to through this session to get into some of our driving legislation, that process of encumbering funds, just because of the way that we are somewhat of a unique state organization in that, because of the process you outlined, and because we'll see this the end of every biennium, not just tied into this one, but it'll be true of every biennium. So is there an opportunity to have a legislative update that can capture and encumber those funds, especially we're seeing things like kickers and other things come out, that we can stay true to the commitments that we're making through our process?
Yeah. So the budget presentation that we've been working on really focuses on the operation side of OWEB, because that's what the legislature provides funding for and has responsibility over. The board has responsibility over the grant side of our budget. I think you all understand that pretty clearly. And so we really have focused the budget presentation on the nuts and bolts of OWEB and how OWEB does its work and what's necessary in its work and how the grant processes are in place. So it is a really nuts and bolts to drive that message home and to be able to talk about some of these challenges. Traditionally, it hasn't been a problem with Measure 76 because those have had the carry forward. General fund is new to the budget here. And so it created a different challenge, I think, and I think a different recognition that OWEB didn't go and adopt new rules for this money that came in. To get the programs up and out the door, we used our existing program rules to do that. And the process, which I think in conversations previously with the board, gave the board more confidence in the integrity of that $52 million-ish investment, that it was being managed and there was strong oversight. And so there just is a need to take people back to the grounding of how we do our work. And if in the future, there's an expectation that money goes out much faster, then there needs to be rule authority and some additional ability to do that in a way other than using our current rules.
Thank you. And then could you also just comment on how we're getting the word out to our project partners, given that we have this, what I call Cinderella money that disappears on June 30th, or potentially?
Yeah. So staff have been in a real constant communication with our partners. Initially, when it wasn't in the governor's budget, and clearly there were concerns raised by the partners about now what do we do? And I think it took us just a bit to sort out the governor's budget and what was in the new package versus what was anticipated to be there and wasn't, and how we might work through that. And so again, we've worked really closely. We've talked with the partners about where we're at now, and the legislative intent to work with it in the budget process for us. And so just trying to keep that communication open to provide as much as surety as we can for where we're at.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And no surprises, but also it's a way to illustrate and let the public know all the incredible work that goes on behind the scenes to help protect and advocate for our project partners, for our watersheds, and for the good investment of public taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Other questions from other board members, or if there's other staff members who have comments that we want to add to things we missed, as Stephanie mentioned. Board member questions? Go ahead.
I would just add just a little more so that, to set expectations in terms of the budget presentation. So the fact that the agency's budget presentation will focus on the operations side of things. As we've talked with partners, I anticipate the partners are going to come in and talk about grants and what they're doing on the ground. We will illustrate some of those, but really the focus from our presentation will be on the nuts and bolts of the agency and agency operations.
Thank you. And I know you update the board on a regular basis, but this nuance of this potential challenge, given the general fund dollars, some of our board members may be hearing now or closer to the June 30th deadline from some of our partners. We may want to just help to make sure they have that information and armed with, so they're getting calls, they're able to respond to those directly. Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And not seeing any other questions from board members, let's move on to the next agenda item, which is to discuss committee priorities and intersectionality between committees. And let me just set the stage for this before I hand it over to staff, and then also let me see if Kelly has any comments that she'd like to make on this as well. But what we've been working on within OWEB, the board and staff, is really leaning into try to focus on incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, into how we do our work. We have the more traditional focus of water and climate that has now been part of our focus and conversation, and of course grants and grant administration. Making sure they're important investments in our resources, but it's also incorporating how we do this work. And in the past, as we looked at our committee structure, we do have a DEI committee, and we didn't want to lose that intersectionality aspect. So when we're talking about water and climate issues, we don't want to be at the expense of our DEI work. And so we have the standing agenda item. We were actually asked about it too at our last board meeting, at how we make sure we don't lose one focus while maintaining a focus on other areas as well. And so that's really the purpose of this part of the agenda. And so I want to encourage, and this is an opportunity for that conversation between committee chairs, but also for all board members and for staff to highlight and identify areas where we might be missing that focus, and we don't want things to fall through the cracks. So that's really the purpose of this discussion. And with that, I want to hand it over first to staff. And I don't know if Stephanie or Lisa or Jesse, you want to take that. And then also want to invite Kelly, if you have comments, to share your leadership on the DEI committee.
I'm happy to start, and then Lisa and Jesse and Eric can add. So just a couple of kind of cross-connecting items between committees that come to mind. One is the climate rulemaking, which I know we'll be talking about later, so I won't spend a lot of time on that one today. But I think we're just a consideration that we're keeping in mind across all programs, including in how we implement the climate rulemaking, is just, are we maintaining that accessibility for applicants? Are we keeping the application process accessible, and are we making progress in terms of enhancing accessibility for applicants to request funds from OWEB? So I think that is probably the main issue that's coming to my mind, and I'll turn it over to other folks if they have anything else to add.
I would just add, as we're thinking about grant programs across OWEB and working through them, I think staff were having many, many more conversations about how it crosses over into equity, how work and where it's done impacts environmental justice. And in my mind, there are places like drinking water sources that it comes to mind specifically on a regular basis. How do we help those communities that have maybe traditionally not had the same level of interaction? The other thing that I think has been incredibly helpful and really was at the board's urging that Stephanie and I have worked on is the Meet 3 each quarter, and working to reach out and meet new organizations, whether that may not have worked with OWEB in the past, organizations that were trying to bring more interest into restoration work. We have several groups that we're meeting with now on a quarterly basis to keep them updated on what we're doing at OWEB and how it crosses over into other areas that they may have interest in or opportunities for their members. I specifically speak to that in terms of some of the ag organizations that we're meeting with, and then the organic stakeholder group that we meet with. And we really talk a lot there around the intersection with climate and how organic practices tie into climate mitigation, et cetera. So those are the conversations and what we've all learned, I think, over the last year through the DEI training and the focus of the board really are us coming to the center of other things that we're talking about across the agency.
Thanks, Stephanie and Lisa. And then also, Eric, sorry for not calling you, mentioning you specifically as well on the staffing. And just to speak to that point, also some more work on Indigenous knowledge or tribal communities. And then to say, I actually saw Stephanie at a Say Hey event in Portland, which is an effort to reach out and be a more welcoming environment for our BIPOC communities here in Oregon, our Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. Bruce, you have a question.
Thanks. It's more of a comment. I'm noting a unintended consequence of our reorganization of committees, board committees at OWEB. When we had a number of specific committees and people's efforts were divided up, when the combination for staff reasons primarily when we did it also established the fact that we have board members serving on multiple committees because there are only what, 3? So we have both co-chairs of DEI, environmental justice, sitting on this committee. I don't know if both of them also sit on the grant committee, but I believe that Kelly does. I sit on the DEI Environmental Justice Committee. So that change in committee structure at OWEB had the impact of creating intersectionality and communication and now a knowledge transfer that was not its original purpose, but I think we lucked into that one. Good job.
Great, thank you. And then one, again, Kelly, I want to ask if you want to make a comment, and then I have a related comment, but it's really going to tie into the next agenda item. So, and I've talked to Jesse, so I can address it there. Kelly, do you have anything you want to share in terms of crossover with committees?
Sure, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so I think Bruce really nailed it with his comment. There is so much crossover now that I think, conversations that are coming up in the climate committee are influencing conversations that are happening in the DEI and environmental justice and vice versa. And I'm sure into the grants committee as well. And so I think that that's really helping to make sure we have really good cross communication. At our last meeting, as Stephanie mentioned, we talked about accessibility, especially related to language accessibility. for folks, because it's kind of for those of us that have been in natural resources for a really long time, we kind of tend to just speak in acronyms a lot and just assume that people understand what those acronyms mean, or that people understand the definition of what large woody structure is or something. And it's not necessarily the case. And so we talked about how to make sure that the language that we're using is accessible for everyone, and we're coming from a place where we have a common understanding or a common definition of what we're trying to convey. And so that was a really good discussion that we had, and I think reaches out into all areas of OWEB, you know, into the climate committee, into the grants committee as well. So I think that's something that we'll continue to focus on moving forward. As Lisa and Stephanie continue, you know, their Meet 3, the tour of, you know, all of the organizations that they can reach out to, we're getting updates on those as well, and they're doing a phenomenal job on that. And then, you know, we're still working on our board equity statement, and really just, again, that was a lot of conversation around definition and language as well, making sure we have a common understanding of where we're coming from with that, and really just trying to get that statement correct, and also acknowledge that, you know, we're not perfect and we know that, just to kind of get that out there. So and the other thing we talked about is the tribal training that Ken has scheduled coming up in April, and I'm really looking forward to hearing how that goes. Unfortunately, Ken knows this, I'm not going to be able to attend that, but I am really confident that the staff's going to do a great job with that, and I'm curious to see, you know, the discussion that arises from that, and any comments we get back on it.
Thank you. And Lisa, comment, and then I'm also noting, I wanted to make one other comment on this, and I know we're also running a bit tight on time for one more agenda item. So Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, I think the other place I wanted to cross this over into the grants committee. We have a group of staff that are looking at our grant application and looking to try and streamline it as much as we can. Again, for accessibility and as much ease of application and removing as much redundancy as possible. So there's a lot of work going on at OWEB that has really, you know, been a focus, I think, for the board.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And that has been a really key thing too, of both making it accessible and easy to access, but also making sure that there's opportunity for those who haven't traditionally been, you know, our non-traditional partners, and reaching out, providing information, and making sure we're investing in all Oregonians and resources for all Oregonians. Really appreciate that. The other point, and this came up actually, I was thinking the public hearing process, not public hearing, but public comment process. What I'd like us to do is make sure on the summaries we have on the agendas, and perhaps we have on the website as well, to also talk about if there's other language barriers people have, so translation and then or interpretation, and then also if folks need signing ASL access to our meetings as well. So that can be a future conversation, but part of our DEI conversation as well. And with that, let's turn to the climate resolution rulemaking process. And this has been both this process and the grant making process has been part of the conversation of how do we get, and this is a crossover from the DEI conversation, how do we make sure we have people at the table setting the stage for the rules and the process for making allocation. That's critically important to making sure we're investing those dollars in all Oregonians. But I'll turn this over, I believe, to Eric Hartstein or Jesse for this update. I'm not sure who's going to provide this update.
Thanks, Jamie. We'll do a bit of a tag team here. So we've had 3 rulemaking advisory committee meetings to help develop climate-related evaluation criteria for OWEB's grant programs to date. We were hoping to have a 4th and really the potentially final meeting yesterday, but had to cancel as we felt we didn't have enough of the RAC members that were available for the meeting. So we think we will have the final rulemaking advisory committee in April 11th to be specific. And so far at the meetings, we spent time providing background on the board's climate resolution, as well as the outcomes related to the public engagement of that resolution that staff conducted last spring. And we've reviewed drafts of the rule language that we're developing, including definitions. And I will say one area where there's been some intersectionality is on the local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. This is one of the definitions that we have in our draft rules. And that's very similar language to what's in environmental justice statutes that's carrying over to the board's draft equity statement. So we're seeing some good synergy there. And also at the last RAC meeting, we spent a lot of time discussing on what draft guidance would look like for grant applications as the applicants would look to address climate-related issues in their applications. And so we felt this was important as there's been a lot of concerns expressed, including at the January board meeting, around the potential burden being placed on applicants. And we wanted to reassure folks by providing examples to the level of deep details that we think we're going to be expecting from applicants as they look to address the climate-related criteria in their applications. I'll note before handing it over to Jesse that we have all of the meeting materials for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee meetings in the rulemaking section of OWEB's website, which includes recordings of the meetings because we are live streaming on YouTube and having them recorded as well. So I'll turn it over to Jesse to see if you have anything to add. And also remind you, the committee members, that we will be providing a update to the full board in April.
Thanks, Eric. I think one thing I would add is that through the different RAC meetings, one of the things that we've tried to do is to reflect back on what we heard in those public listening sessions. So we've incorporated that feedback into presentations and into the discussions, just making sure that all the folks that are on the RAC committee feel like they are aware again of what those concerns and comments were that were really rose to the top as part of that public engagement process. You know, things about making sure to start with the qualitative descriptions and, you know, moving towards quantitative down the road. Those kinds of things are really at the forefront of people's minds as we look at developing those draft climate evaluation criteria. And the other thing I just wanted to expand on is the guidance piece, which is we have also been working with the group that Lisa mentioned, the staff that's working on streamlining our application process. So any kind of guidance or examples that we're providing, we're trying to do that in line with whatever new questions might be or revised questions might be developed as part of that application, so that we're not having to create something now that's going to become obsolete because the application's changing. And so really trying to work, you know, with all of the different efforts that are going on in the agency to improve our application. So, and the guidance really did seem to speak to our RAC, just seeing how these climate criteria would be applied and what we'd be looking for.
Excellent. Thank you. Great summary. Any questions? I know we're at time, but any questions from board members on this? And there's the opportunity to weigh in on this at the upcoming board meeting and the April 11th committee meeting. So encourage folks who are members of the public want to weigh in. Just as we wrap up, any comments for the good of the order or potential agenda items for our next meeting? Already we've talked about including the voluntary carbon markets. Anything else for the next agenda meeting, next committee agenda? Seeing none. Thanks, everyone. I know there's so much work that goes into preparing for these meetings and really a lot of great work going on behind the scenes. Thanks, Bruce, for your great presentation and kicking off the conversation. Thanks to everyone at the board for your work and staff for your just phenomenal, all the great behind the scenes work that's happened. I look forward to seeing you all at our board meeting and then to carry on the conversations on the important topics. And thanks for the members of the public who joined us on this conversation.
Jamie, I would like Eric Murray to come to my house and help me organize my bookshelves based on how well he's done with his.
Very important comment. We'll work on that between this and the next meeting. Thanks, Bruce, for always your valuable